Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So I'm doing this one a little bit earlier. There's about an hour and a half left of the market, but with the earnings coming up when the market closes, I want to be, obviously focus on that and everything. And I don't want to be making a video where I can't really sit and look at the earnings and, look at, the updates, the news, whatever, the earnings call especially. So kind of want to get this video out a little bit earlier today so that I can, of course, free up my time for that. So essentially, let's take a look at Tesla so far. So far, and I don't expect this to change too much. Maybe in the last like half an hour or so, maybe it'll get some, more violent move up or down. But overall, I expect this to go fairly sideways for the rest of the day. Again, except for maybe like the last like half hour, 15, maybe even 10 minutes, right? But essentially, we're down 4% roughly. We're going to be down roughly 4%, maybe 3, maybe slightly more than 4, but between 3 to 4.5%, we will most likely be down for the day by the time it closes. Now, it's unfortunate. I'm not gonna lie. It is a little bit unfortunate. I really thought that, we were setting up for a good position to move upwards, which we were. But this is what I was talking about yesterday, and people were saying like, "Oh, you're all over the place, man. You're talking about Netflix, not Tesla, Tesla." The reason I'm talking about Netflix is number one, people misinterpreted thinking I'm comparing Netflix to Tesla. Obviously, they're not even remotely the same. I'm not saying just because Netflix went down that means Tesla will go down, because people were like, "Oh, but Tesla has Elon." It's like, yes, and there's no comparison being made between the two in that sense. Like, I'm not saying just because Netflix went down, Tesla will go down. The comparison, or I guess the reason I brought up Netflix is because it's a FANG, or at least it was a FANG stock. It's a big tech growth stock. When you see a growth stock like Netflix give such horrible earnings and guidance, and then drop 36% in a day, which is like absurd. Like, it's an unbelievable amount of, like, that's a huge drop, like unparalleled. Like, that's unbelievable. Like, it's like more than penny stocks even almost. When you see essentially a growth stock, a big stock like this, a big company like this do this and have this kind of move, not only does it reflect on the market and weigh down the market as a whole, you can see the QQQ is down 1.3%. So it's going to weigh down the market as a whole. As a result, Tesla, of course, Apple, all those things, being tech stocks and part of that kind of basket, they're going to get weighed down a bit as well because of Netflix, right? It's just going to drag the market down with it. That was my first reasoning for bringing it up. And the second reasoning is because this is also going to bring a lot of kind of fear and that kind of negative sentiment to the market and to growth stock earnings, which of course is Tesla. So essentially what that means is that people, after seeing Netflix, some people are going to be a lot more nervous about Tesla's earnings because now they saw Netflix happen and they're like, wow, well, what if something that happens to Tesla? Tesla's also a massive growth stock. What if something happens? What if they're not suddenly growing as fast anymore, like out of nowhere, and then it drops 40% or whatever? It's just fear. It creates fear in the market, and that is going to affect Tesla. That's why I brought it up. And that's the reasoning, in my opinion, or at least a major reason why, it is currently down 4%. The indices are down 1.3%, Tesla down slightly more. Again, I do think people are a little bit scared going into the earnings overall, pretty much because of Netflix, in all honesty. So we'll see what happens, of course, once it comes out. But nonetheless, we're going to be going sideways, in my opinion. And this is where technical analysis, in my opinion, is also less effective. Because, like, when you have such a massive catalyst like earnings, it's extremely hard to predict through technical analysis, because just through like looking at Netflix, I thought that it'll go up. Clearly not. So it's like it's very hard to predict because it really just depends on what they report at the end of the day, right? No one really knows except for obviously the insiders. So it's very hard to predict what Tesla is going to be doing. But essentially, like, if you were to look at it at more of like a grand scheme, like, or a grand scale, a bigger scale, if you will, ultimately, let's just look at the daily. I guess it's the easiest way. Ultimately, worst case scenario, I think we drop down to the low 900s. Best case scenario, I think we run up to like about 1100. Those essentially from this middle point, that's essentially the two paths I see. Either we drop down about 7% ish, or we rise up about 10%. Something like that. Between 7 to 10%, I think will be the overall move that we'll get. Maybe not like instantly off of earnings, like literally right after, after market, etc., or after hours. But, within maybe the next day or two or something like that, as the earnings gets like digested and stuff. That's essentially what I'm thinking. Like, if I were just to guess like a more kind of broader move, if you will, right? Either we go pretty much down or up 10%, essentially, roughly, is what I am personally predicting. Now, one thing that I like to look at sometimes for this specific thing where technical analysis tends to be a little bit weaker to predict is actually options flow, right? Options flow essentially giving us an idea as to essentially what are people betting, what's big money betting, what is happening with all of that. So one thing you can do that I like to do is using unusual whales. I have a link down below if you guys want to check it out for yourself, try using the service yourself. But one thing I like to look at here for Tesla, for instance, is most active chains, right? So you can see here the most active chains, right? And it shows you, the, basically if it's bullish or bearish. So the way you want to look at this is, first of all, by far, like not even, I mean, kind of close, but definitely like well above the rest of them are the two calls for 1100 and 1050, right? The volume you can see is really high. Now, what volume essentially means, volume is pretty much, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but volume is essentially just kind of like volume, almost like in a market, where it's not necessarily that's how many people are holding it. That's just like how many things were like traded, bought or sold, essentially, like just transactions, if you will. Open interest is, I personally think, is a little more interesting. Open interest to me, again, correct me if I'm wrong, means essentially current like active, essentially active like options being held, if you will, at the very moments, which you can see is substantially higher than pretty much almost anything else on this list. This one is pretty high too. You have a 950. I think this is more of a hedge people are doing. And you have a 1200 here, pretty high as well. 21,000 volume and almost 14,000 open interest, which is pretty high. You got a couple puts here at less open interest, but I think these are more hedges. But the way you want to look at it also on top of this is just because you see a lot of open interest and volume on like 1100 and 1050 call doesn't necessarily mean that it's all bullish. You want to look at this, right? Obviously, naturally, I mean, the more red it is, the more bearish it is, the more green it is, the more bullish it is, right? But you might be wondering, how can a call be bullish or bearish? Like, what does that mean? I thought all calls are bullish. Well, no, because the reason, the way that one of these calls can be bearish is, for instance, here you can see the 1100 is, very slightly more red than green. It's probably like 55-45 in all honesty at most. It's pretty split down the middle, but it's very slightly more red than green, it looks like, right? Now, that essentially means people are selling 1100 covered calls for this coming Friday, which is a bearish position. It's not that bearish. To me, like a true bearish position, if we saw like 1000 and this was like very red or something like that, or even like 1050 and this was like very red, that's like more bearish. 1100 isn't that bearish. That essentially just means if people don't think it'll go above 1100, that's all that really means by Friday, which, yeah, I don't think it will either, in all honesty. I don't think it'll go that high. I do think it might. If it's a good earnings, it might go up to, close to 1100. I'll be surprised if it goes above 1100, especially by this Friday, which is why a lot of people are selling their covered calls, you can see here, for that, which is kind of a hedge in itself as well. So that's essentially what I'm seeing. Pretty much the overall scheme you can see here, there's definitely overall more green than red. So it's overall more bullish than bearish. Like a bullish put, for instance, is people are selling 700 puts. So essentially, if somehow Tesla plummets to 700 by this Friday, which I just don't even imagine that will, you can see it's not worth a lot because the chances of that happening are very little. Then people will essentially be buying Tesla at 700, which again, I would be very shocked if it will, but I guess it's not impossible. Could pull a Netflix. So that's essentially what I'm looking at here, right? You can see it's overall more bullish and bearish. You can see here biggest option trades. So you want to look at this based on the date being traded. Today is of course 420. So these are all the trades. You can see pretty split down the middle in terms of bearish and bullish bets. Green, of course, being bull, red being bearish. But the best thing to look at here is essentially just based on the amount of premium, aka the amount of money, pretty much in that trade. So you can see here, one of them is really nice, is someone actually sold a 1100 or a 1000 put, 13 million premium, which of course is a bullish bet. Essentially, they're willing to buy Tesla if it drops under 100. But if you click on this, then it gives you more information about the overall trade, right? So it's like, it gets pretty complicated, but the easiest way to look at it is it does seem slightly more bearish or bullish than bearish going into earnings. And people are expecting it to go up to 1050, maybe even close to 1100 is what is currently being shown in the options market. So that's the way I'm personally currently seeing it, and what I am personally seeing at the very moment. But all that being said and done, guys, let me know what you think down below. This is going to be a spicy earnings, especially after Netflix setting that very scary tone. We'll see what happens, guys. We of course will see what happens. It's very difficult to predict. Tesla's actually falling here. You can see, wow, as I'm speaking, I actually put in an order to buy 10 shares at 980. So if that procs at 980, I'm very happy to buy a couple shares here. I don't really mind personally. I'll buy 10 shares. But again, I still have my cash secured put for 950. So if Tesla falls to 950, I'm buying under 950. Essentially, I still have my covered call that I sold for 1080. I think it was. I sold that on I think it was Monday or Tuesday. I can't remember. I sold it on either yesterday or the day before that. And then I also have shares that I'm just holding right now and waiting to see what happens, because I really don't know what to do with those right now. That one I'm just holding through earnings. I do think there's a higher chance to move up than down for earnings. And if we move up, then depending on how far we move up, or maybe I'll sell covered calls, maybe I'll just sell the shares entirely for that specific amount of shares. Who knows? We'll see. Of course, this earnings will be very interesting. It'll be a major catalyst. And yeah, that's all I have to say for this one, guys. it's going to be interesting. Let's just say that. As usual, a lot of money is riding on Tesla and their option markets for the earnings. Yeah, let's just get into it, guys. We'll see what happens, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace, peace, peace.